Maybe your coalition really wants to focus on some of those complex challenges, or you really want to focus on systems change. But you have been noticing that some of the traditional tools and approaches you've used in the past might not be the best fit. I was noticing this too when I joined HSC's Human System Dynamics training. And one of the tools they introduced me to was the landscape diagram. Now, this tool is called different names in different contexts. For example, it's also called the Stacey diagram and also the certainty agreement matrix. I want to share this tool with you, and I also want to share some of the data collection implications. So here's the landscape diagram. On one end, you have a lot of agreement and a lot of certainty. What does this mean? It means that you and your collaborators know basically what sort of interventions work. You know what outcomes you're working towards, and you know that if you implement this intervention correctly, you will achieve the outcomes you are hoping to achieve. Basically, you know what works, and if you do it, you're going to see the results. For example, let's say that you scored badly on a math test, and you know previously when this has happened, if you study 2 hours a day, you're going to see an improvement in your test scores. So you do that, and ultimately, you see an improvement in your test scores. Basically, you know what works, and if you do it right, you're going to see the results you hope to see. What does this mean for data collection? Well, it means that you have a model that you want to follow as closely as possible. So you're going to do fidelity testing. That is, you're going to be tracking to make sure that you're implementing the model the right way. It also means that you're going to be measuring some outcome data. So maybe there are specific knowledge, attitude, or behavioral changes you're hoping to see, and you can simply do a pre and post test to see if those results were achieved. More broadly speaking, this is where formative or process evaluation, as some people call it, and summative evaluation are good fits. And more broadly speaking, when you're identifying the right interventions, if you will, it's where expert advice will come in hand. Because if you talk to the right experts, you'll find the right solution. Ultimately, you'll be able to implement said solution and achieve the outcomes you're hoping to see. This is the world where best practices actually work. This area basically is called dynamic or predictive. It's where those predictive strategies live. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you have very low agreement and very low certainty. The Stacey model actually calls this area chaos. Here, you don't really have any clear solutions, and you might not even know what specific outcomes you're working towards. So it's going to be even harder for you to find a solution that you can be certain will achieve outcomes. You basically don't really know what's going on. Examples of this are crisis situations. Now, we can all think back to when COVID started. We weren't sure how long COVID was going to last. We weren't sure to what extent we needed to shift strategies. We didn't know what particular strategies will work really well. Maybe we didn't know what challenges our community was facing. All we really knew was that something was happening and that people needed help. But we didn't know exactly what sort of help would be helpful, nor what sort of strategies would help them get that help. What does this mean for data collection? Well, it means that we really need to focus on understanding what's happening. This is where focus groups and interviews with those with lived experience might be especially helpful. And then you can follow that up maybe with some larger data collection efforts to see how many people have similar experiences. That's where some of that quantitative data might come into play. That is, you're probably going to be doing a needs assessment. For those of you who work with coalitions, this is why you're always collecting some data related to your key indicators, because you're trying to make sure that you always know what the general environment is like. In this middle area, you have partners that are willing to shift ideas and strategies, maybe because there isn't a clear solution, or maybe because there's a lot of solutions that could potentially work. Partners are also willing to change the specific outcomes they're working towards. Again, maybe because we're not sure which changes would actually lead to a better future. Also, when we think about the sorts of interventions that are available to us, we're not 100% certain that those interventions will actually work in our context. That is, we're not sure if we're actually can be 100% certain that we'll achieve those outcomes or the changes we want to see. Because we're open to trying a variety of solutions and we're open to a variety of potential outcomes and we're not 100% certain that we'll achieve those outcomes, the focus of data collection here is really to learn. And because there's not a lot of certainty, we want to make sure that we're learning as we go. It's very easy for us to fall into analysis paralysis here. If we wait to have all the answers, we're going to be waiting for a very long time. Because even experts in these situations can provide guidance, they are not going to have a foolproof solution for us to implement. So instead of waiting for you to have all the data before you decide to move forward, the correct thing to do here is to start implementing, collect data as you go, and remain flexible. This means that your data collection tools might evolve and shift as your initiative and activities evolve and shift. You're probably going to have a lot of key indicators you're going to be tracking. Because the focus is on learning, you're going to want to document the process and document changes as they happen as well. Instead of just capturing data related to outcomes, whether they're achieved or not, you want to also capture data about the sorts of patterns you're trying to establish. This is where principled focus evaluation comes in, where developmental evaluation comes in, and I've talked a little bit about those in previous videos as well. Because you're focusing on learning, you're going to be thinking about what's being implemented, how is it shifting, what are ways to improve what's being implemented, are adaptations needed, what's working well, where, why, what's not working well, where, why. An example of this is, let's say you have a group or a network of teachers that come together. Perhaps initially that group of teachers came together to just, connect and network and have a sense of a place where they can come and vent to each other. So your intervention there is just a networking group. And the outcome there, maybe it's an increased sense of a belonging in a school district. However, maybe that network decides to evolve and maybe there are some participants there that want to focus a little more on action. So there, maybe that intervention shifts from just a networking group to a community action group. And the sorts of outcomes you're working on there might be policy shifts that in the school district. So this is an example of an intervention that started to look one way and then evolved into something else. And because the intervention itself evolved, it means that the outcomes shift along the way. So you're really trying to document the pattern of change. And when we're thinking about a coalition, different projects and different types of parts of your coalition are going to exist at various places on this landscape diagram. One area of this landscape diagram is not better than the other. So, for example, let's say you have a new community action team that forms. They want to tackle maternal mental health in your county. They're not sure what the data looks like related to maternal mental health right now. So a needs assessment is happening. They're going to live in this exploratory area. Let's say, on the other hand, you have a tutoring group. You want to improve third grade math grades. You know that in this particular school, tutoring has worked in the past, so you're going to implement that. That will live in the predictive area. Now, your coalition as a whole, it might shift and evolve as partners come and go. Your priorities might change. That coalition as a whole lives in this emergent area. The following is a resource I found about the Stacey matrix. Now, while we're using different language and the particular model we're using is slightly different, I still thought it was useful. Instead of simple, you can think of the predictive area here. You identify what works and you follow that recipe. They also have 2 additional categories. I thought if you're interested, you can explore this tool a little more, but I don't really use those in the landscape diagram. In the complex area, or that adaptive emergent middle area, you learn by doing. And then in that exploratory area or chaotic area, you're basically trying to create stability and increase your awareness of what's happening.